I was standing in my driveway in Phoenix, Arizona, watching the electrician pack up his tools when I noticed Sharon marching across her perfectly manicured lawn like she was about to declare war on my entire existence. The afternoon sun beat down on us mercilessly, and I could already feel sweat trickling down my back. But Sharon looked cool as a cucumber in her pressed khaki shorts and polo shirt, with the Sunset Ridge HOA logo embroidered on the chest. She was the vice president of our homeowners association, a title she wielded like Thor's hammer, and judging by the scowl on her face, I was about to get struck by lightning. "Isaac," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Isaac Campbell, what is that monstrosity you've installed on the side of your house?" I turned to look at my brand new whole house generator, which my electrician Mike had just finished connecting. It was a beautiful piece of equipment, a Generac Guardian series that could power my entire house during the frequent summer blackouts that plagued our neighborhood. Living in Phoenix meant dealing with an overtaxed power grid every summer, and after last year's 3-day outage that had cost me a refrigerator full of food and nearly killed my elderly mother who was visiting, I'd decided enough was enough. "It's a generator, Sharon," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "You know, for when the power goes out, which happens about twice a month around here." Sharon's face turned an impressive shade of red that matched her lipstick. "I can see that it's a generator. But did you get approval from the Architectural Review Committee before installing it?" I felt my jaw tighten. "Here we go. Sharon, I read the HOA bylaws front to back. There's nothing in there about generators. I made sure before I spent $15,000 on this thing." Section 7. Subsection C clearly states that any external modifications to the property must be approved in writing by the committee, Sharon said, crossing her arms over her chest. "That includes any mechanical equipment visible from the street." "The generator isn't visible from the street," I countered, gesturing toward my house. "It's on the side yard behind the fence. You can't see it unless you're standing in my driveway or your driveway, and last I checked, my driveway is still my property." Mike, my electrician, cleared his throat awkwardly. He was a burly guy in his 50s with calloused hands and a weathered face that spoke of decades working in the Arizona heat. "Mr. Campbell, I'm going to head out. You've got my number if you need anything. The generator's all set and ready to go." "Thanks, Mike. I appreciate all your help," I said, shaking his hand. Sharon watched Mike load his tools into his van, her lips pressed into a thin line. As soon as his van pulled away, she stepped closer to me. "This isn't over, Isaac. I'm going to call an emergency meeting of the board and we're going to discuss this violation. You'll be receiving a fine in the mail." "A fine for what?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. "I haven't violated anything. Show me where in the bylaws it says I can't have a generator." "It's an unapproved modification," Sharon insisted. "And it's probably not even up to code. I doubt you got the proper permits." I pulled my phone out of my pocket and opened my photos, scrolling to a picture of the permit approval from the city of Phoenix. "Here's the permit. Approved 2 weeks ago. Everything is completely legal and up to code. Mike is a licensed electrician who's been doing this for 30 years. Sharon barely glanced at my phone. "City permits aren't the same as HOA approval. You should have come to us first." "Why would I come to you first when the bylaws don't require it?" I asked, feeling my blood pressure rising. "Sharon, I've lived here for 8 years. I've never once violated any HOA rule. I keep my lawn perfect. I paint my house the approved colors. I even took down my kid's basketball hoop when you complained it was 3 inches over the height limit. But this is necessary equipment for my home, and I followed every rule." "We'll see what the board says," Sharon snapped. "And what the police say. I blinked. The police? What do the police have to do with this? You've installed potentially dangerous equipment without proper authorization. For all I know, it could explode and take out half the neighborhood. I'm calling the police right now to report a safety hazard. Before I could respond, Sharon had her phone out and was dialing. I stood there in disbelief as she actually called 911 and reported that her neighbor had installed dangerous electrical equipment that posed a threat to the community. The operator must have told her it wasn't an emergency because Sharon's face got even redder, but she insisted that someone needed to come out immediately. I went inside, shaking my head. My wife Patricia wasn't home yet. She was still at work at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and tried to calm down. Sharon had always been a pain, but this was taking it to a new level, calling the police over a generator. It was absurd. About 45 minutes later, I heard a knock on my door. Through the peephole, I could see a Phoenix police officer standing on my porch and Sharon hovering behind him on my walkway. I opened the door and immediately felt bad for the officer, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Officer Rodriguez. I received a call about some equipment installed at this residence." He had a notepad in his hand but seemed uncertain about why he was even there. "Yes, officer. I installed a whole house generator today. It's completely legal, permitted by the city, and installed by a licensed electrician." "Would you like to see the permits?" Officer Rodriguez nodded, and I invited him inside to grab the folder of paperwork Mike had left me. Sharon tried to follow, but the officer held up a hand. "Madam, please wait outside." I could see Sharon's mouth open in protest, but Officer Rodriguez had already stepped inside and closed the door. I handed him the folder, which contained the city permit, Mike's license information, the manufacturer's specifications, and the inspection certificate. The officer spent several minutes looking through everything, and I could see his expression shift from neutral to impressed. "This is very thorough documentation, Mr. Campbell. Everything appears to be in order. Mind if I take a look at the installation?" "Not at all. It's around the side of the house." We walked outside and Sharon immediately started talking. "Officer, that thing is a hazard. It's too close to the property line and he never got HOA approval." "Madam," Officer Rodriguez interrupted, his voice firm but polite. "Let me do my job, please." We went around to the side yard where the generator sat on its concrete pad. Mike had done an immaculate job. The generator was properly positioned with adequate clearance on all sides. The gas line connection was clean and professional, and the transfer switch installation in my garage was textbook perfect. Officer Rodriguez walked around it, checking various aspects, and even took out his phone to compare some measurements with the code requirements. "Mr. Campbell, who did this installation for you?" he asked. "Mike Donovan from Donovan Electric. He's been in business here for decades." Officer Rodriguez nodded slowly, still examining the setup. "This is really excellent work. The clearances are all correct, the mounting is solid, and the electrical connections are perfect. I've seen a lot of bad generator installations, but this isn't one of them." Sharon had followed us around the house despite being told to wait, but he didn't get HOA approval. Officer Rodriguez turned to her with barely concealed frustration. "Madam, HOA approval is a civil matter, not a criminal one. There's no crime being committed here. The homeowner has all the proper city permits and the installation meets all safety codes. There's nothing for the police department to do here. But the bylaws are between you and Mr. Campbell to work out. That's not police business." Officer Rodriguez looked back at the generator, then at me. "Mr. Campbell, would you mind giving me your electrician's number? My wife and I have been talking about getting a generator installed, and if he does work like this, I'd love to get a quote. I couldn't help but smile. Sure thing, officer. Mike Donovan. I pulled up his contact info on my phone and sent it to Officer Rodriguez's number. Sharon looked like she was about to have a stroke. Her face had gone from red to almost purple, and her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. This is outrageous. Officer, are you seriously asking for a referral when you should be writing him a citation? Officer Rodriguez's patience finally wore through. Madam, I've explained this clearly. There is no violation of any law here. The equipment is legal, properly permitted, and safely installed. If you continue to waste police resources on civil HOA disputes, you could be cited for misuse of emergency services. Now, I'm going to leave, and I suggest you work this out through your HOA's proper channels. After Officer Rodriguez left, Sharon stood in my driveway for a moment, trembling with rage. You think you've won, but you haven't. I'm going to make sure the board fines you the maximum amount. We'll put a lien on your house if we have to. Sharon, you need to actually read the bylaws, I said, tired of the whole situation. I haven't violated anything, but you go ahead and do whatever you need to do. She stormed off, and I went back inside. I texted Patricia to let her know what had happened, and she responded with a string of angry emojis and a message saying she'd be home in an hour. My wife had even less patience for Sharon than I did, which was saying something. That evening, Patricia and I sat on our back patio, enjoying the slightly cooler evening air. Patricia was still in her scrubs, having come straight home after her shift. She was a dedicated nurse who worked in the emergency room, and she'd seen enough real emergencies to find Sharon's dramatics particularly absurd. She actually called the police, Patricia asked, shaking her head. Over a generator. Yep. Told them it was a safety hazard and that I'd installed dangerous equipment without authorization. What did the officer say? He asked me for Mike's number so he could get a generator installed at his house, I said, and Patricia burst out laughing. Oh, that must have killed Sharon. I thought she was going to explode right there in the driveway. We enjoyed the evening, but I knew this wasn't over. Sharon was vindictive, and she had the full weight of the HOA board behind her. Well, most of it anyway. The board consisted of Sharon as vice president, a woman named Brenda who was the president and Sharon's best friend, and 3 other members who usually just went along with whatever Sharon and Brenda wanted. There was also a property manager who handled the day-to-day operations, but he mostly stayed out of the political drama. Sure enough, 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Inside was a notice of violation, a fine of $500, and a demand that I remove the generator within 30 days or face additional fines of $100 per day. The letter cited Section 7, subsection C of the bylaws, exactly as Sharon had mentioned. I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out my copy of the bylaws. I'd read them before installing the generator, but now I read Section 7 even more carefully. The section dealt with architectural modifications, but the specific language referred to structures and visible alterations to the exterior appearance of the home. I grabbed a highlighter and marked the relevant passages. Then I did something I probably should have done before. I called a lawyer. My friend Jake had recommended a real estate attorney named David Martinez, who specialized in HOA disputes. I called his office and managed to get an appointment for the next day. David Martinez's office was in Scottsdale, about 20 minutes from my house. He was a sharp-dressed man in his 40s with graying hair and an air of confidence that came from winning a lot of cases. I explained the situation, showed him the violation notice, and handed him a copy of the HOA bylaws. He spent about 15 minutes reading through everything, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. Finally, he looked up at me and smiled. "Mr. Campbell, you have an excellent case. The bylaws are very specific about what constitutes an architectural modification requiring approval. A generator, particularly one that isn't visible from the street, doesn't fall under that definition. Courts have consistently held that HOAs cannot enforce rules that aren't clearly stated in the governing documents. So, what do? You write a response letter disputing the fine and requesting a hearing before the board. I'll draft it for you. In the letter, we'll cite the specific language of the bylaws and explain why your generator doesn't violate them. We'll also point out that the generator serves a legitimate purpose and that you followed all city codes and obtained proper permits. And if they don't back down, then we file a lawsuit. But honestly, most HOAs back down when they realize they're on shaky legal ground. The problem is that many board members don't actually understand their own bylaws, and they're used to homeowners just complying rather than fighting back." David drafted the response letter right there in his office. It was professional, detailed, and made a compelling argument. He charged me $300 for the consultation, and the letter, which seemed like a bargain compared to the ongoing fines the HOA was threatening. I sent the letter via certified mail the next day, and I also requested a hearing before the board, which was my right under the bylaws. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, on a Thursday evening at 7 o'clock at the community clubhouse. During those 2 weeks, I did my homework. I researched Arizona HOA law, court cases involving similar disputes, and I even found several examples of other HOAs in the Phoenix area that had tried and failed to ban generators. I printed everything out and organized it into a binder. I also talked to my neighbors. It turned out that several of them had been considering installing generators themselves after last summer's blackouts. When they heard about my situation with Sharon and the board, they were outraged. My next-door neighbor, Tom, had dealt with Sharon's wrath before when he'd painted his front door a shade of red that Sharon claimed wasn't on the approved color list, even though it clearly was. "Sharon just likes to bully people," Tom said as we stood in his driveway one evening. "She's been on that board for 5 years, and she acts like she owns the whole neighborhood. Brenda's no better. They're like the mean girls from high school who never grew up." "Well, I'm not backing down on this," I said. "The generator is legal, it's necessary, and I'm not removing it." "Good for you. If you need someone to speak at the hearing, let me know. I'll be there." The night of the hearing arrived, and Patricia and I drove to the clubhouse. I brought my binder of research, copies of all my permits and documentation, and a notepad. As we walked into the community room where the meetings were held, I was surprised to see at least 30 other residents already there. Tom caught my eye and waved us over to some seats he'd saved. "What's everyone doing here?" I whispered to Tom. Word got around. People are sick of Sharon and Brenda running things like dictators. This seemed like a good time to show some support. The board sat at a table at the front of the room. Sharon was there in another polo shirt with the HOA logo, looking smug. Next to her was Brenda, the president, a tall woman with short blonde hair and an expression that suggested she'd rather be getting a root canal. The other 3 board members looked uncomfortable, like they'd rather not be there at all. Brenda called the meeting to order and went through some routine business first. Then she got to my case. Item 7 on the agenda, violation hearing for Isaac Campbell, 4582 Desert Willow Drive, regarding unauthorized installation of mechanical equipment. I stood up, and Patricia squeezed my hand for support. I walked to the front of the room and Brenda gestured for me to sit in a chair facing the board. "Mr. Campbell, you've been issued a violation notice for installing a generator without Architectural Review Committee approval. The board has reviewed the matter and determined that the generator constitutes an exterior modification requiring approval under Section 7, subsection C of our bylaws. Do you wish to respond?" I opened my binder. "Yes, I do. First, I'd like to provide some context. Last summer, our neighborhood experienced multiple extended power outages. During one of those outages, my elderly mother was visiting, and the lack of air conditioning in 115-degree heat was dangerous for her health. I also lost hundreds of dollars in food. After that experience, I decided to install a whole house generator to protect my family and property." Sharon interrupted. "That's all very touching, but it doesn't change the fact that you violated the bylaws." "Actually, Sharon, I didn't," I said calmly. Section 7, subsection C states that approval is required for structures or visible alterations to the exterior appearance of the home. A generator is not a structure. According to Black's Law Dictionary, which courts use to interpret contract language, a structure is a building or edifice. A generator is a piece of mechanical equipment, not a structure. I pulled out a printed copy of the bylaw and the legal definition and handed copies to each board member. Sharon's face was already starting to flush. "Furthermore," I continued, "the generator is not visible from the street. It's located on the side yard behind my fence. The only way to see it is from my driveway or the driveway of my immediate neighbor, who, by the way, has no objection to it." Tom raised his hand from the audience. "That's right. I'm the neighbor and I think it's great. I'm planning to get one myself." Brenda shot Tom an annoyed look. "Please hold comments until the appropriate time." I pulled out more papers. "I've also brought copies of the city permit, which was approved after a thorough review by a city inspector. I have documentation from my electrician, who is licensed and has 30 years of experience. I have the manufacturer's specifications showing that the generator meets all safety requirements. And I have photos showing the installation, which, as you can see, is professional and clean." I passed around the documentation. The 3 board members who weren't Sharon or Brenda started looking through everything with interest. One of them, a man named Robert, seemed particularly engaged. "Mr. Campbell, this is very thorough," Robert said. "Did you consult with an attorney on the bylaw's interpretation?" "I did. I have a letter from my attorney explaining why the generator doesn't fall under Section 7, subsection C." I handed over copies of David's letter. Sharon was visibly fuming now. "This is ridiculous. The spirit of the bylaw is clearly to maintain the aesthetic appearance of the neighborhood. A big metal box sitting on the side of someone's house doesn't fit that spirit. The generator is not visible from any public area," I repeated. "And even if it were, there's no specific bylaw against generators. If the board wants to create a rule about generators, you're welcome to propose one, but you can't retroactively enforce a rule that doesn't exist." Another board member, a woman named Linda, spoke up. "Mr. Campbell, you mentioned that other neighbors are interested in getting generators. Is that true?" "Yes. Several neighbors have expressed interest, especially after last summer's outages." Tom stood up. "I'd like to say something if I can." Brenda sighed. "Fine." "The floor is open for community comment." Tom walked to the front. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 12 years. I've served on committees, I've volunteered for community events, and I've always tried to be a good neighbor. But this board, specifically Sharon and Brenda, have made living here increasingly unpleasant. Every little thing becomes a huge issue. People are afraid to make any changes to their own homes without getting dragged through these ridiculous hearings. Isaac followed all the rules. He got city permits, he hired a licensed electrician, and he installed equipment that will protect his family during power outages. Instead of fining him, we should be thanking him for being a responsible homeowner. Several people in the audience clapped. Sharon's face was now the color of a tomato. Another neighbor, an older woman named Margaret, stood up. "I'd like to speak too. I'm 78 years old and I live alone. During those power outages last summer, I was terrified. It was so hot and I have a heart condition. If Isaac's generator can keep his family safe, then good for him. And I agree with Tom. This board has become way too aggressive about enforcing rules that don't even exist." More applause. Brenda banged a gavel, looking flustered. "Order, please. This is not a free-for-all." But the floodgates had opened. One by one, neighbors stood up to voice their complaints about the board's overreach. Someone brought up the time Sharon had fined a family for having their garage door open during the day while they were doing yard work. Another person mentioned how Brenda had threatened fines over a decorative flag that was supposedly the wrong size, even though it met the bylaw specifications. It became clear that this hearing wasn't just about my generator anymore. It was about years of frustration with a board that had overstepped its authority again and again. Finally, Robert, the board member who had seemed reasonable, held up his hand. "Okay. Everyone, let's calm down. I think we need to take a break and have a board discussion. Can we have the room for 15 minutes? Everyone filed out into the parking lot. Patricia hugged me. "You did great in there." "I think we might have opened Pandora's box," I said, looking at all the angry neighbors milling around. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "This has been a long time coming. Sharon and Brenda needed to hear this." After 15 minutes, we were all called back inside. The board members took their seats, and Brenda looked decidedly less confident than before. "The board has discussed the matter," Brenda said. "We've decided to table the violation for now and seek additional legal counsel on the interpretation of Section 7, subsection C. Mr. Campbell, you will not be fined at this time, but the matter is not closed." Sharon looked like she wanted to argue, but Robert cut her off. "I also want to propose that we form a committee to review all of our bylaws and enforcement procedures. It's clear that there's some confusion about what is and isn't allowed, and we need to clarify things for everyone's benefit." Several people voiced their approval. Brenda adjourned the meeting, and as people filed out, numerous neighbors came up to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to the board. Sharon cornered me near the door. "This isn't over, Isaac. You got lucky tonight, but I'm going to find a way to make you remove that generator." "Sharon, why are you so obsessed with this?" I asked, genuinely curious. "What harm is the generator causing you? It's about principle," she snapped. "If we let you get away with this, everyone will think they can do whatever they want." "No, it's about control," I said. "You like being in charge and making people do what you say. But I followed the rules, Sharon, all of them. You're just mad because you can't bully me into backing down." Sharon opened her mouth to respond, but Patricia stepped between us. "We're done here. Have a good evening, Sharon." We left, and on the drive home, Patricia and I processed everything that had happened. "Do you think they'll drop it?" she asked. "I don't know, but I'm not removing the generator regardless. If they want to fight this in court, David said we have a strong case." Over the next week, I didn't hear anything from the HOA. Then, 8 days after the hearing, I received another certified letter. My heart sank when I saw it, but when I opened it, I was surprised. The letter was from Robert, the reasonable board member. He explained that he had consulted with an HOA attorney who confirmed that my interpretation of the bylaws was correct. The generator did not require architectural approval. The violation and fine were being rescinded. The letter also mentioned that Sharon had resigned from the board effective immediately, and that Brenda had announced she wouldn't be seeking re-election when her term ended in 3 months. I called Tom immediately. "Did you hear about Sharon?" "Oh yeah," Tom said, laughing. Apparently, after the meeting, several homeowners filed formal complaints about her behavior over the years. The board reviewed her conduct and basically gave her the choice to resign or be removed. Brenda saw the writing on the wall and decided to step down too. Wow, I didn't expect that. People were fed up, man. Your generator issue was just the tipping point. There's already talk about who should run for the board in the next election. We need people who will actually follow the bylaws instead of making up rules as they go. 2 weeks later, I was in my garage working on some projects when I heard a vehicle pull up. I walked outside to see Officer Rodriguez getting out of an unmarked car. Mike Donovan's van was parked across the street at another house. "Mr. Campbell," Officer Rodriguez called out with a wave. "I wanted to stop by and say thank you. Mike just finished installing our generator and it looks fantastic." "That's great. I'm glad it worked out." "Yeah, my wife is thrilled. We've got a baby on the way and she was really worried about power outages this summer. This gives us peace of mind." He paused. "I also wanted to ask how things went with your HOA situation. I felt bad leaving you to deal with that woman. She seemed like a real piece of work." I laughed. "It actually worked out." There was a hearing. A lot of neighbors showed up to support me, and the board eventually agreed that I hadn't violated any bylaws. The woman who called you actually resigned from the board. Officer Rodriguez grinned. "Good. I've dealt with her before, actually. We got called to her house about 6 months ago because she claimed her neighbor was trespassing. Turned out the neighbor's lawn care guy had accidentally blown some grass clippings onto her driveway. She wanted us to arrest him. That sounds about right. Anyway, I'm glad it worked out. Mike told me you did your homework and came prepared with all your documentation. That's the way to handle these things." After Officer Rodriguez left, I went back inside feeling pretty good about how everything had turned out. The generator had already proven its worth too. Just last week, we'd had another power outage that lasted about 4 hours. While the rest of the neighborhood sweltered in the heat, my house stayed cool and comfortable. Patricia had even invited Margaret, the elderly woman from the hearing, to come over and get out of the heat. We'd sat in the air conditioning, had some iced tea, and Margaret had told us stories about the neighborhood from decades ago. But then things took an unexpected turn. About a month after Sharon's resignation, I got a call from Robert. He'd been appointed interim vice president after Sharon left, and he wanted to meet with me about something important. We agreed to meet at a local coffee shop the next morning. Robert looked serious when I sat down across from him. He had a manila folder in front of him, and he seemed uncomfortable. "Isaac, I need to tell you something, and it's pretty concerning. After Sharon resigned, we started going through the HOA financial records to prepare for the transition. The board is supposed to review the finances quarterly, but honestly, Sharon and Brenda always just told us everything was fine and we trusted them. That was a mistake. What did you find?" "We're missing about $30,000. I stared at him. "Missing? What do you mean, missing?" "The HOA account should have a balance of around $80,000. That's the reserve fund for community expenses, emergencies, repairs to common areas, that kind of thing. But when we looked at the actual bank statements, there's only $50,000 in the account. Where did the money go?" Robert opened the folder and showed me bank statements. "That's what we're trying to figure out. There are all these checks written to something called Sunset Ridge Consulting over the past 2 years. $2,500 here, $3,000 there. They add up to almost $30,000 total." What's Sunset Ridge Consulting? We have no idea. We've never hired any consulting firm. The payments were approved by Sharon as vice president and Brenda as president. They both had signing authority on the account. I felt a chill run down my spine. You think they were stealing from the HOA? I don't want to jump to conclusions, but it looks suspicious. We're supposed to have detailed records of all expenses, and there's nothing about this consulting company in any of our files. No contracts, no invoices, no documentation of what services they supposedly provided. Have you confronted them about it? Not yet. I wanted to gather more information first, but I'm probably going to have to call the police. If board members were embezzling HOA funds, that's a serious crime. Jesus, Robert, this is crazy. I know. And here's the thing that made me want to talk to you specifically. Going through the records, I found that Sharon had been targeting certain homeowners with violations way more than others. You, Tom, Margaret, a few other people. And most of those violations were for things that were borderline or completely made up. Then those homeowners would pay fines, and that money would go into the general fund. So she was harassing people to generate revenue that she could then steal. It looks that way. I think she saw the HOA as her personal piggy bank, and she used violations and fines as a way to keep money flowing in. I sat back in my chair, processing this. What do you need from me? I wanted to give you a heads up, because if this goes where I think it's going, you might be contacted by police as a witness. Also, the board is probably going to reach out to everyone who paid fines in the last few years and offer refunds, since many of those fines were probably improper. I appreciate you telling me. What's your next step? I'm calling our HOA attorney today to get advice on how to proceed. Depending on what he says, I'll probably file a police report. This is beyond what the board can handle internally. 2 days later, I saw police cars parked outside Sharon's house. Patricia and I watched from our front window as officers went inside. They were there for over an hour, and when they left, they were carrying boxes of documents. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Tom called me within minutes. Did you see the police at Sharon's house? Yeah, they just left. Robert gave me a heads up. Apparently Sharon and Brenda were embezzling from the HOA. No way. How much? Around $30,000, maybe more. Robert's still going through all the records. That's insane. I always knew Sharon was a control freak, but I never thought she was a criminal. Over the next few weeks, the truth came out. Sharon and Brenda had set up a fake consulting company and had been writing checks to it for almost 2 years. The money went into a bank account they controlled, and they'd been using it for personal expenses. Sharon had taken a luxury cruise to Alaska. Brenda had bought a new car, and they'd split the rest. The reason they'd been so aggressive about violations and fines was exactly what Robert suspected. They needed to keep money flowing into the HOA account so that the missing funds wouldn't be noticed. The police investigation also revealed that Sharon had been falsifying records. When board members had asked to review the finances, she'd provided fake statements that showed the full balance. She'd been doing this for over a year, and Brenda had been complicit. Both women were arrested and charged with embezzlement, fraud, and theft. The case made the local news, and our quiet neighborhood suddenly had reporters showing up asking for comments. Most of us declined, but Tom gave an interview where he called them the most corrupt HOA board members in Phoenix history. The clip went viral on local social media. The legal process moved slowly. Sharon and Brenda both hired lawyers and pleaded not guilty, claiming that the consulting company was legitimate and that they'd provided services like community research and neighborhood development planning. The problem was that they couldn't provide any documentation of these supposed services. No reports, no deliverables, nothing. Meanwhile, the HOA had to figure out how to recover the stolen money. Our attorney filed a civil lawsuit against both women, seeking to recover the $30,000 plus legal fees and damages. The lawsuit alleged breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and conversion of funds. I ended up being interviewed by the detective handling the case. He came to my house one evening, and I told him about my experience with Sharon, the generator dispute, and how she'd called the police over something that wasn't even a violation. "Mr. Campbell, we've heard similar stories from several homeowners," the detective said. He was a middle-aged guy named Detective Harris, who looked tired but determined. "It seems like Mrs. Sharon Whitmore had a pattern of targeting certain residents with bogus violations. We think she was doing this to intimidate people and keep them from questioning her authority. If people were afraid of her, they wouldn't look too closely at what she was doing with the HOA money." "That makes sense," I said. "She definitely seemed to enjoy exercising power over people. We're building a strong case. The evidence is pretty clear. What we're trying to establish is intent and the full scope of the fraud. If you think of anything else that might be relevant, please give me a call." After Detective Harris left, Patricia and I talked about how bizarre the whole situation was. "When we moved into this neighborhood, the biggest drama was about what color people could paint their mailboxes," Patricia said. "Now we've got HOA board members getting arrested for embezzlement. I know, it's crazy, but at least it's all coming out now. Imagine if they'd kept getting away with it for years. You think they'll go to jail? I don't know. Probably depends on whether they take a plea deal or go to trial. The preliminary hearing happened about 2 months after the arrests. The prosecution presented evidence showing the fake consulting company, the checks, the bank records showing personal expenses, and testimony from the HOA attorney about the lack of any legitimate consulting services. The judge found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial and set a trial date for 6 months later, but the trial never happened. 3 months after the preliminary hearing, both Sharon and Brenda accepted plea deals. They pleaded guilty to felony theft and fraud charges. Sharon was sentenced to 2 years in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation. Brenda got 18 months in jail and 3 years of probation. They were also ordered to pay full restitution of $30,000 plus legal fees, which came to about $45,000 total. The sentencing hearing was open to the public, and several neighbors attended, including Tom, Margaret, and me. It was surreal sitting in the courtroom watching Sharon and Brenda stand before the judge. Sharon cried and apologized, saying she'd made terrible mistakes and that she was sorry for betraying the community's trust. Brenda was more stoic, but also apologized. The judge was not sympathetic. "You both held positions of trust in your community. Homeowners paid their HOA dues believing that money would be used for the benefit of the neighborhood, not to fund your personal luxuries. You violated that trust in a calculated and ongoing manner. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a scheme that went on for years. And when people questioned you or challenged your authority, you retaliated against them with false violations and harassment." After the sentencing, Detective Harris caught up with me outside the courthouse. "Mr. Campbell, I wanted to thank you for your cooperation during the investigation. Your documentation of the generator dispute helped establish the pattern of retaliatory conduct. I'm just glad they got caught," I said, "and I'm glad I kept all those records." "Always keep good records," Harris agreed. "It saved you from those bogus fines and it helped us build our case." Life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal after that. The HOA held a special election, and several new board members were elected. including Tom. The new board implemented a bunch of reforms. All financial records would be reviewed monthly by the full board. Any expenditure over $500 would require approval from at least 3 board members, and there would be quarterly meetings open to all homeowners to discuss finances and any concerns. The new board also officially adopted a generator policy. After reviewing the bylaws and consulting with an attorney, they acknowledged that generators were permitted as long as they met city codes and weren't visible from the street. Several more neighbors installed generators over the following months, and there were no disputes about any of them. Officer Rodriguez became something of a regular presence in the neighborhood. He and his wife had their baby, a healthy girl they named Sophia, and Mike Donovan's generator kept their house running smoothly during the inevitable summer power outages. Officer Rodriguez recommended Mike to several other people on his beat, and Mike ended up getting so much business that he hired 2 additional electricians to help with the increased demand. Mike stopped by my house one day to thank me. "Isaac, I wanted to let you know that your generator installation ended up being the best advertising I could have asked for. Between Officer Rodriguez's recommendation and all your neighbors seeing your setup, I've installed probably 20 generators in this area alone. Business is booming." "That's great, Mike. You do excellent work. You deserve the success." "Well, I appreciate you standing up to that HOA lady. If you'd caved and removed the generator, none of this would have happened." About a year after everything went down, I was sitting on my back patio on a Saturday morning, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, when Patricia came outside with her phone. "You're not going to believe this," she said, showing me her screen. "Sharon's trying to sell her house." I looked at the real estate listing. Sharon's house was on the market for about $50,000 less than comparable homes in the neighborhood. She probably needs to sell to pay the restitution and legal fees. Good. I hope she has to start over somewhere else where no one knows what she did. That's a little harsh. Isaac, she tried to fine us for having a generator that could literally save our lives during a power outage. She stole from every single person in this neighborhood. She harassed elderly people like Margaret. I don't feel bad for her at all. Patricia was right, of course. Sharon had brought this on herself through her greed and her need to control others. Whatever hardships she faced now were consequences of her own actions. Tom's tenure on the board turned out to be exactly what the neighborhood needed. He was fair, transparent, and actually bothered to read and understand the bylaws before enforcing them. Under his leadership, the HOA became much more reasonable. They focused on actual issues like maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events, and addressing legitimate safety concerns. The harassment and petty violations stopped. Margaret became something of a neighborhood celebrity after she gave an interview to a local news station about the embezzlement case. She spoke about how Sharon had made her feel unwelcome in her own home, and how the new board had restored her faith in the community. The interview was touching and brought a lot of positive attention to how the neighborhood had reformed itself. As for me, my generator continued to work perfectly. We had several more power outages over the next year, and each time, my house stayed comfortable and functional. I even hooked up a small refrigerator in the garage and would offer cold water and snacks to neighbors during outages. It became a bit of a gathering spot, with people stopping by to cool off for a few minutes and chat. One particularly hot day in July, during a 6-hour outage, I had about 15 neighbors in my house. We set up a rotating schedule so people could come in, cool off, charge their phones, and get something cold to drink. Margaret came over and stayed for most of the afternoon, playing cards with Patricia and some other neighbors. Kids ran around playing video games. It felt like a block party, except it was all happening inside my air-conditioned house, thanks to the generator Sharon had tried so hard to make me remove. Tom was there, and at one point he raised his beer and said, "Here's to Isaac's generator and to standing up to bullies." Everyone cheered, and I felt genuinely grateful for how things had turned out. What had started as a frustrating dispute with an unreasonable HOA board member had ended up exposing corruption, reforming the neighborhood leadership, and bringing the community closer together. 2 years after the initial generator installation, I ran into Officer Rodriguez at a hardware store. His daughter Sophia was now a toddler, riding in the shopping cart and chattering away. We caught up for a few minutes, and he mentioned that his generator had run flawlessly through another rough summer. "You know, that day I came to your house because of that HOA complaint was one of the more interesting calls I've gotten," he said. "Usually, HOA disputes are just two neighbors arguing about a fence or a tree, but that lady was something else. Sharon was definitely unique. I looked up the case after it went to trial. I couldn't believe she'd been stealing that much money, and all over a generator that was completely legal." "The generator was never really the issue," I said. "It was about control. She couldn't stand that I challenged her authority." "Well, I'm glad you did, and I'm glad I asked for your electrician's number. Best decision I made that day." We said goodbye, and I finished my shopping. On the drive home, I thought about how much had changed in 2 years. The neighborhood was better, the HOA was functional and fair, and my family was safer and more comfortable thanks to the generator. Sometimes standing up for what's right leads to outcomes you never could have predicted. When I got home, Patricia was in the kitchen making dinner. Our kids were in the living room doing homework. The generator sat quietly on the side of the house, ready to kick on automatically if the power went out. Everything felt settled and right. "Hey," Patricia said as I put away the groceries. "Tom called. He wanted to know if you'd be interested in running for the HOA board in the next election." I laughed. "Are you serious?" He said. "You'd be perfect. You actually read the bylaws, you're fair, and people trust you after how you handled the Sharon situation." "I don't know." "That sounds like a lot of meetings. Think about it. No pressure." I did think about it over the next few days. The idea of serving on the HOA board wasn't initially appealing, but then I realized that was exactly the wrong attitude. The reason Sharon and Brenda had gotten away with their scheme for so long was because good people didn't want to bother with HOA politics. They'd left it to the people who craved power and control, and look what had happened. When Tom called a few days later to follow up, I told him I'd do it. "Really?" Tom sounded surprised. "That's great. The election is in 2 months. You'll have to submit a candidate statement and probably attend a meet and greet." "I can do that." The election campaign was low-key. I wrote a statement about wanting to ensure the HOA operated transparently and fairly, and that homeowners should feel supported by their association, not harassed by it. Several neighbors endorsed me, including Margaret, who wrote a lovely note about how I'd welcomed her into my home during power outages and had stood up for what was right even when it was difficult. I won the election easily, along with 2 other new board members who shared similar values. Our first board meeting was a stark contrast to the hearing I'd attended 2 years earlier. We discussed actual issues, organizing a neighborhood cleanup day, getting bids for repaving the community pool deck, and reviewing a request from a homeowner who wanted to install solar panels. Someone brought up the solar panels request as potentially needing architectural approval. I pulled out the bylaws, and we read through the relevant section carefully. Solar panels weren't specifically mentioned, but the language about structures was the same language that had been used to try to block my generator. We all agreed that as long as the solar panels met city codes and weren't absurdly visible or out of character with the neighborhood, they should be permitted without additional HOA approval. Let's err on the side of letting people improve their homes, I said. Unless there's a clear violation of a specific rule, we should support homeowners, not obstruct them. Everyone agreed. It felt good to be part of a functional, reasonable board that actually served the community instead of ruling over it. Sharon and Brenda both ended up serving their full jail sentences. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Sharon had indeed sold her house at a loss and moved out of state after her release. Brenda moved to a different part of Phoenix. Neither of them were part of the neighborhood anymore, which was probably for the best. The whole experience taught me several valuable lessons. First, always document everything, especially when dealing with organizations that have power over you. My detailed records and research had saved me from unjust fines and had helped establish a pattern of misconduct during the criminal investigation. Second, standing up for yourself matters. If I just removed the generator to avoid conflict with Sharon, I would have been without power protection for my family, and Sharon and Brenda might have continued their embezzlement scheme indefinitely. By refusing to back down, I'd inadvertently helped expose their corruption. Third, community matters. The support I received from neighbors like Tom and Margaret had made all the difference during the hearing, and the reforms that followed had made our neighborhood a much better place to live. On a warm evening 3 years after the generator installation, the neighborhood held its annual summer barbecue at the community park. It was a beautiful evening, with the heat finally breaking as the sun went down. Kids played on the playground, adults mingled and caught up, and someone had set up a sound system playing music. Margaret found me near the grills where Tom and I were cooking burgers. "Isaac, I wanted to thank you again for everything you did. This neighborhood feels like home again." "You don't need to keep thanking me, Margaret, but I appreciate it." "No, I do. You could have just removed that generator and avoided all the trouble, but you stood your ground and it ended up making everything better for all of us." Tom flipped a burger and grinned. Isaac Campbell, generator guy, enemy of corrupt HOA boards and now actual HOA board member. Quite the character arc, I laughed. "I never thought a generator would lead to all this." "That's because you were just trying to keep your family safe during power outages," Margaret said. "You weren't looking for a fight, but when Sharon came after you, you defended yourself properly. That's courage." Patricia walked over with our kids who were begging for hamburgers. As we all sat down to eat together, I looked around at the neighborhood that had become so much more than just a place we lived. It was a real community now, one where people looked out for each other, and where the HOA actually served the residents instead of exploiting them. My generator sat at home, quiet and ready, a piece of equipment that had somehow catalyzed a transformation. Officer Rodriguez had asked for my electrician's number instead of writing a citation, and that simple moment had been the beginning of everything unraveling for Sharon and Brenda. Justice had prevailed, the neighborhood had reformed, and my family stayed cool and safe during every power outage. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance lead to the biggest changes. I just wanted a generator to protect my family during Phoenix's brutal summers and inevitable blackouts. I ended up helping to expose embezzlement, reform an HOA, and build a stronger community. Not bad for a piece of mechanical equipment on the side of my house. As the barbecue wound down and families headed home, Tom and I stayed behind to clean up. We packed away the grills and picked up trash while the sun fully set and the stars came out. "You know what's funny?" Tom said. Sharon was so obsessed with controlling everyone that she couldn't see she was actually destroying the community. Now that she's gone, this place is better than it's ever been. People who crave power are usually the worst ones to have it, I said. The best leaders are the ones who serve reluctantly. Is that why you were so hesitant to join the board? Maybe. I just wanted to live my life, take care of my family, and be a good neighbor. I never wanted to be in charge of anything. Well, you're doing a great job anyway. We finished cleaning up and said goodnight. I walked home through the quiet neighborhood, past houses where families were settling in for the evening. The streetlights cast long shadows, and I could hear the faint hum of air conditioners working to fight the lingering heat. My generator was still there on the side of my house, exactly where it had been installed 3 years ago. It had outlasted Sharon's tenure on the board, survived an attempted fine, become evidence in a criminal investigation, and ultimately proven to be exactly what I'd intended. A reliable piece of equipment that protected my family. I went inside where Patricia was getting the kids ready for bed. Everything was normal, peaceful, and good. The drama was over, the corrupt board members were gone, and justice had been served. Sometimes things actually work out the way they should. And whenever the power went out, which it still did with frustrating regularity during Phoenix summers, my generator would kick on automatically within seconds. The lights would stay on, the air conditioning would keep running, and my family would be safe and comfortable. That's all I'd ever wanted, and despite Sharon's best efforts to stop me, that's exactly what I got. 3 years, multiple power outages, 1 embezzlement investigation, 2 criminal convictions, and countless neighbors with their own generators later. I could say with confidence that standing up to Sharon had been worth it. The neighborhood was better, the HOA was functional, and my family was protected. Officer Rodriguez had been right to ask for my electrician's number instead of writing a citation, because Mike's work was excellent and deserved to be shared. In the end, that's what it all came down to, doing the right thing, standing up for yourself when you're in the right, and building community with the people around you. Sharon and Brenda had tried to turn the HOA into their personal kingdom and bank account, but they'd failed. The neighborhood had survived, reformed, and thrived, and my generator kept running perfectly, ready for whatever Phoenix's brutal summers could throw at it.